Okay, let's begin. So, good morning, ladies, gentlemen. It's nice to see you one more time. So, what are we going to do today? Well, I'm going to do a quick recap of what we are going to present in this occasion, ¿vale? So, according to the schedule, today I'm going to take a quick zoom here because we cannot see anything. Now, today and yesterday we were according to the schedule, we would talk about the video blog. What did you used to do when we were bored? And according to the learning guide, so let's go to the learning guide. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Here, according to the learning guide said, teniendo en cuenta la temática estudiada en el componente formativo, que solías hacer cuando estabas aburrido, haga una presentación en inglés a través de un video corto mencionando esas actividades que solía hacer para pasar el tiempo debido a que no podía salir de casa a divertirse, usando para tal fin expresiones como used to, pasado simple, y haciendo un contraste con el presente simple, right? Additionally, the learning guide says, we are going to answer questions like this. Vamos a responder preguntas como estas. ¿Cuáles eran los momentos del día en que se sentía más aburrido durante pandemia, ¿no? Durante la época de distanciamiento social? ¿Cuáles eran esas actividades que solía hacer para quitarse el aburrimiento? Decidió por su cuenta hacerlas o las vio en alguna fuente externa. Solía hacer esas actividades solo o con alguien más. Hoy compartió a través de redes sociales esas actividades con alguien más para que las usara. Puede que sí, puede que no. So this is the activity you're going to present in this occasion. And this is why yesterday we were making a parallel between simple present tense and simple past tense. ¿Vale? So, because this is what we are going to present in this occasion, according to the learning guide. So, yesterday we made a parallel between simple present tense and simple past tense, and we mentioned that the difference between a verb to be between in the present and verb to be in the past is only mentioned in the verb, in the conjugation of the verb, because the reasons why we study or why we use verb to be both in present and in past are exactly the same. We use it to talk about age, location, physical appearance, personality, and so on. ¿Vale? In both occasions, in both situations. In terms of grammar, the organization is exactly the same. We need a person who is in a specific place or is tall, intelligent, interesting, and so on. And so the reasons are exactly the same. And the organization is the same, but the conjugation of the verb is going to be modified. In simple present tense verb to be, the verb to be is going to be modified as am, is, and are. However, in simple past tense verb to be, the verb to be is going to be conjugated as was or were. That's it. On the other hand, we have different another verbs. Like, these verbs could be regular or irregular verbs. And to talk about the second part, the second section, we need to remember that both regular and irregular verbs have a specific conjugation. I mean, we have the infinitive form or verb form or non-modified form, if you prefer, the simple past tense form in the second column, and in the third column we have the past participle. We also mentioned that in simple present tense, in affirmative sentences, we are going to use the infinitive form, therefore the column number 1. However, in simple past tense, in affirmative sentences, we are going to use the word that's going to be located in the second column. So broke, bought, caught, achieved, controlled, and so on. ¿Vale? So this is the difference between past tense and simple present tense in terms of in terms of affirmative sentences, grammar. We also mentioned that in negative sentences and also in questions, the organization is going to be the same. ¿Vale? So what changes is the conjugation of the auxiliary verb, because in simple present tense, the auxiliary verb is going to be called do or does, and in simple past tense, the auxiliary verb is going to be called did. So this is the other difference. There's something else I didn't mention, but it's important to remind you in this moment. Something I forgot to tell you is that in simple present tense, in affirmative sentences, if the action is performed by Andrea, Christian, or the aunt, la hormiga, pues, we are going to modify this verb by adding s, es, or ies, depending on the context. However, in simple past tense, the verb is going to be always the word that we are going to find in the second column of the verbs. Doesn't it won't matter. It's not going to be important if the person is a third person of singular or plural, second person or first person, because the word is going to be the same for everybody. Okay? So this is the difference between simple present tense and simple past tense in terms of grammar. If you want to check more details, you can check the previous video or the previous session. ¿Vale? But this is the main difference between present and past in terms of grammar. However, we didn't stop there. We also said that the difference between simple present tense and simple past tense also is also related to the application. I mean, what are the reasons why we use one or the other tense? And we said that simple present tense expresses habits and repeated actions. Also is going to be used to talk about permanent situations, to talk about general truths, something that is true in Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, Germany, Poland, the United States, Vietnam, and so on. The fourth reason why we study simple present tense is to talk about likes, opinions, and hobbies. And finally, to talk about schedules, in this case, a prediction of the future, a future that we cannot modify because it doesn't depend on us, and especially to talk about events that are created by somebody else. If we attend to this event, it's going to be great. If we don't attend to this event, it won't happen anything. So it won't matter because we once again we don't have the power to modify this schedule. On the other hand, the simple past tense mentions something that was true for a period of time in the past. So we are talking about habits in the past. First situation. The second situation, or the second reason why we study simple past tense is because we want to express an active, or we want to mention that an activity or an action started and finished in the past in a specific moment in the past. And finally, we use simple past tense to mention or to describe a series of actions that started and finished in the past again. So when the activity number one finished, started a activity number two, then activity number three, four, five, until the end of the times. So this is what we did last time. Now we are going to focus in the second session, today's session, and we are going to continue talking about used to. Used to is if we only focus in the verb, we are going to notice that use is a regular verb, which in its past form is called used, and also in its past participle. Because remember that regular verbs, when we talk about regular verbs, the past form and the past participle form are exactly the same. We're going to talk about this next week in the next session, but it's important to take it into account since now. So used to, um, because use means usar. However, used to is an auxiliary verb that's going to have a different meaning. And it's going to mean something like soler, solía, solíamos, solían, and so on. And we use this auxiliary verb in simple past form to talk about habits or actions or activities that we used to perform in the past, but now are not true. We are not doing these activities anymore, at least not today, right? So we indicate we used to indicate that something happened regularly in the past in a repetitive form, but today these actions, these activities, these states, these situations, these habits are not true anymore. They don't happen today anymore. Okay? So the used to form is used in past form, in its simple past tense. Okay? Because once again, it is conjugated as a in its past form, and we know how we can conjugate it in the past form because it's a regular verb. How is it going to work, this verb? Well, we are going to take into account the past simple form. Let's remember that the past simple form in affirmative sentences requires a person who performed an action in the past. I wrote, she sang, we believed, and so on. But this main verb here, the past form of the verb, is going to be used to. But according to the translation we mentioned before, solía, solíamos, solían, according to this, we are going to need another verb because we cannot just say yo solía casa, for example, right? It doesn't have any sense. We need an alternative verb, an additional verb to make this verb works. In this case, we are going to use another verb, and this verb is going to be in infinitive. So in the list of verbs, we are going to focus in the first word, the word in the first column, depending on what we want to express, of course. So in this case, for example, we could say, I used to work, I used to believe, we used to play soccer, Mariana used to swim, and so on. To mention that something was true in the past, but now not anymore. And to make this parallel, we are going to complete this activity, this situation, comparing the situation with something in the present, maybe directly, maybe indirectly. For example, I used to play the piano. Okay, this is what I used to do in the past, right? Used to and play. Play what? Soccer, the bass, the guitar, in this case the piano. But the contrast, we need a contrast, and the contrast is when I was younger, when I was 21, when I was 15 years old. Now I'm not 15, I'm 21, 27, 30 years old, whatever, but I don't do this anymore. I don't play the piano anymore. So we make the contrast. Something that was true in the past that is not real today, right? So we make this parallel. In this case, the parallel is mentioned with simple past tense, and that's possible. But we can also make this parallel with simple present tense, and that's why we studied simple present tense and simple past tense last time, because this parallel could be mentioned normally with simple present tense, but not necessarily. What about negative sentences? Do you remember that simple past tense? In simple past tense, we use the auxiliary verb did not or its contraction didn't, and then we use the main verb or the yes, the main verb in its base form or in its infinitive form? Well, we are going to do something similar here. We're going to use did not or didn't, the contraction, used to as the main verb, but once again, if we mention the translation, we would say like nosotros no solíamos. No solíamos what? Solíamos escribir, jugar, visitar amigos, I don't know. Therefore, we are going to need an additional verb, and this verb is going to be in infinitive. Therefore, we are going to focus in the first column of the list of verbs, and we are going to use the verb we need to express our activity: build, choose, believe, enjoy, show, sleep, smell, and so on. Okay? So in this case, this is an example. I didn't used to like broccoli, but now I do. In this case, this expression is mentioned in past, something that happened that was true in the past, right? And the parallel, the comparative form is that now this is not true because I like to eat broccoli today. I didn't used to like broccoli in 2015, let's suppose that. But now, 2025, I do. I love to eat broccoli, right? So this is a parallel, something that was not true in the past, but today is something different. What about questions? Let's go with the parallel with simple past tense. In simple past tense, to create questions, we used the auxiliary verb at the beginning of the question, right? And the main verb, once again, was in its infinitive form without any change, right? We're going to do something similar here. We're going to have the auxiliary verb at the beginning, mentioning who used to do something. But once again, used to is an auxiliary verb. Therefore, we are going to need an additional verb, a main verb. And this verb again is going to be in the first column of the list of verbs. Doesn't matter whether it's going to be a regular or an irregular verb. What matters is that we use one of them depending of what we want to express. Did you used to teach in high school? Did you used to swim when you were 15 years old? Did you used to speak Arabic when you were in the United Arab Emirates in 2021? Let's suppose that, right? So this is what we are going to do. We are going to do. We are going to use the auxiliary verb to did in past. They used to form to mention that something was true in the past, but not today. And the main verb. And this is an example. Did you used to have a pet when you were a child? Right? We are making a parallel of something that was true in the past with a specific situation, right? Or another example, because we can make another example here. Did you used to collect stamps? We are not mentioning something. We are not comparing something in the past with today's situation directly, but according to the context, we can understand that this comparison is between something that happened last year, last month, last decade, last century, whatever, with today's situation. And to answer to this question, we are going to also rely or take into account or use the information we know with simple past tense. In simple past tense, we use the auxiliary verb did to answer these questions. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, he did. No, he didn't. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. And the only word that changes for short answers is the subject. I, you, he, she, and so on. Finally, to create questions, we also can remember that we have short questions and long questions, right? So short questions, yes, no questions if you prefer, and long questions are WH questions. So we could ask something like where, how often, and so on. For example, where did you used to go on vacations when you were younger? And this is also a possibility. Something that happened in the past, but it doesn't happen today. Where did you used to go on vacation when you were younger, when you were 15 years old, when you were in your 20s, right? Something that's not true anymore. So this is how we use this this specific verb, ¿vale? And this is perfect to mention, according to the learning guide. This is perfect to mention to answer this question. ¿Qué solías hacer cuando estabas aburrido? En este caso, in this case, durante la época de emergencia sanitaria, 2019, 2021, right? What we used to do when we were at home and we were not capable to go out because of the COVID-19 situation, right? We used to watch TV, we used to play soccer in online. We used to watch movies very often, but today is not true, not very true, because it doesn't happen very often, for example, right? So we already know how to use this auxiliary verb used to. The second topic we can take into account for today's lesson is subordinating conjunctions. And what is that? And why do we use them? Well, to talk about conjunctions, we need to remember that a conjunction is a word that joins another words or another groups of words. Words is like a glue. The conjunction, the objective of a conjunction is to join words to make something, to make a sentence, to make a paragraph, to make an idea stronger and more complex and elegant. So we can have something more interesting to mention, something more complex. And the idea is to avoid something simplistic. For example, we could say, I love cooking, I love cooking, I love eating, I don't like washing the dishes afterwards. And this is perfect because we're mentioning here likes and dislikes. But if we want to improve our our idea using these three verbs, and we if we want to avoid redundancy, we can make something better by saying I like cooking and eating, but I hate washing the dishes. And it's going to be better because we avoid repetition. Another example, for example, we could say I love a chocolate ice cream. I love a strawberry ice cream. I love vanilla ice cream. I love a lemon ice cream. I hate watermelon ice cream. I hate chocolate ice cream. If you notice that, this is very redundant, very repetitive, but it's okay at the beginning. If you want to mention these all sentences, all these 7 sentences, it's perfect, but it's going to be a little redundant. Therefore, we can improve this situation by using words like and but. Only these two words are going to improve our expression. In this case, we could say, for example, I love ice vanilla, lemon, chocolate, strawberry, and cherry flavors of ice cream. However, or bad if you prefer. I hate what I mentioned, pineapple and vanilla flavors. Notice that this new sentence takes into account all the previous context, and it's shorter and more elegant and more complex at the same time. So this is the idea of a conjunction to make something shorter, complex, and elegant. And the idea is to avoid redundancy and simplistic sentences. Okay? So the idea of the conjunctions is that they need to be used to join, to combine elements with the same structure, relationship, and so on. Therefore, we are going to take into account, or we're going to focus in join nouns with nouns, adjectives with adjectives, simple present tense with simple present tense, and so on. Okay? In this case, we are going to focus in subordinating conjunctions. What is that? What is the meaning of subordinating? Subordinating, they are called subordinating because they depend on something else. Therefore, we're going to talk about two different sentences. Okay? One sentence that it's independent, and one other, and there is another sentence what's going to be dependent on the previous one. Okay? So this is what we are going to take into account with the subordinating conjunctions. There is something dependent and there is something independent. ¿Vale? And there are two possibilities to mention this dependency. We could mention first the sentence that is independent, or we could mention the sentence that depends on the other situation. For example, Jimena went swimming. This is the independent sentence. This sentence doesn't depend on anything. This is a complete sentence, right? Because we don't need more information to understand this idea. However, if we focus in, although it was raining, a pesar de que estaba lloviendo, we notice, we understand, our sixth sense says, okay, something's happening here. Although it was raining, what happened next? Or what happened before? Or what happened at the same time? We need to complete this idea, right? A pesar de que estaba lloviendo, ok. A pesar de que estaba lloviendo, what happened? A pesar de que estaba lloviendo, me perdí una pierna, no caminé, me fui a jugar fútbol. What happened, right? This is why we mentioned that this is a dependent situation, a dependent sentence. This depends on the previous one. So, independent sentence and dependent sentence. This is the first possibility. The second possibility is that we use this dependent sentence at the beginning, although it was raining, and then the independent sentence. Jimena went swimming. What we need to take into account is that if we start with the dependent sentence, then we are going to use a comma, right? This symbol to make a difference or a separation between these two ideas. So this is a subordinating conjunction. There are many subordinating conjunctions. We could talk about reasons, conditions, places, relative adjectives, manners, concession, comparison, and so on. But we are going to focus in the conjunctions of time to mention what comes next, what comes later, or what came before, or what happens at the same time We are not going to focus in relative pronouns, conditions, relative adjectives, places, manners, and so on, because this is something for another occasion, right? The learning guide is going to focus only in subordinating conjunctions of time, because these other situations are used in another levels, but it's important to understand the context. ¿Vale? So these subordinating conjunctions of time are these. These are the most important ones. After, as soon as, before, once, till, when, whenever, while, and many others. We're going to talk about some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. Okay? Let's begin with after. We use after to mention that something happens next, later. In this case, for example, or in other words, to express that one event follows another. Después de, if you prefer. The workers ended the strike after management agreed to give them a pay raise. In this case, the situation starts with the management agreeing to give the workers a pay raise, and the next situation, the following situation or the following activity is that the workers ended the strike. So the first, in terms of time, yesterday management agreed to give a pay raise to the workers. This happened yesterday, and today the workers ended the strike. So this is the organization of events. Okay? Another example here, Mary closed his diary after writing about the day's events. So Mary writes something and then she closes his diary, right? Mary. Mary in this case is a masculine name because of the possessive adjective. ¿Vale? Let's go with the next one. As soon as is a synonym of once, and once again is a synonym of when. And they are used to mention that an event is followed by another. Once again, is very similar to after, but what's the difference between after and these other three conjunctions or these other three words? Well, the difference is the term is related in terms of time, because as soon as, once, when are used when something happens immediately after. So I finished. Let's go with the example. The workers ended the strike as soon as management agreed to give them a pay raise. In this case, management accepted to give them an increase in the payment today, at no, let's suppose yesterday at 3 p.m., right? So the announcement was made at 3:45 p.m. and then at 4 p.m., it was very quickly, the workers stopped the strike and started working. Meanwhile, in the first situation, in the first scenario with after, what happened is that yesterday they arrived to an agreement at 9 a.m., let's suppose that, and today at 8 a.m. started working. So there is a gap in terms of time, right? So this is the difference between after and these other three words. We could use once as a replacement of as soon as, or we could use when too, because these three words are going to be used for the same situation. Next, as and while. We're going to use as or while because they are a perfect substitutes to express an action in progress that might be interrupted by something else. Might be interrupted. Perhaps, possibly. For example, while the politician was speaking to a large crowd, he fainted from heat exhaustion, right? So, in the same time, So he was doing something, but at the same time, something else happened. So this big activity was interrupted by something else, right? The speech he was mentioning was interrupted because he fell down. He was fainted because he was too exhausted. Sorry, because of the heat, right? A big activity is interrupted by something else. Another example: we got to the party while everyone was leaving. So at the same, meanwhile we were arriving to the concert, to the party, we arrived late, so everybody else was going out from this party, from this concert. Well, next one, before and by the time. We could use the first one or the other, and that's perfect because they are substitutes. After is used to mention a posterior event, something that happens next, right? Before or by the time is the contrast, is the complement, because we are going to use before and by the time to mention that something happens in a previous situation, previously, something that precedes another activity. For example, the workers ended the strike before management agreed to give them a pay raise. So, in the order of events, they ended the strike, and then they accepted an agreement. The management agreed to increase their payments. In this case, the workers end the strike. This is the first situation, and the second situation is that they sign an agreement. In the previous example, with after and as soon as, they first sign an agreement and then the workers go to work. So this is the difference between after and before. Okay? So the order of events. Let's go with since. Next conjunction. Since. We're going to use since when we want to focus on the time or the moment when an activity or action started, when something started. Okay? Something started, in this case, we can focus in the past. Something started in the past, and this activity lasts until today, will last until tomorrow, doesn't matter. We are going to focus in the moment something started. It doesn't matter, it's not important. We are not going to focus when it finished. We are going to only focus in when something started. Since 1994, since last year, since 6 a.m. today, for example. For example, the workers have been on strike since management refused to give them a pay raise. So, management, the administration said, we are not capable to give you a pay raise. And this happened last week, or maybe this happened last month. Perhaps this happened yesterday in the morning. And since then, they, the workers, the factory workers, have said, okay, we are not going to work anymore. And this happens until today. We don't know the ending. We know when it started, but we don't know when it ended, if it has already ended. Let's go with the contrast, the complementary part, until or till. We are going to use these two conjunctions to express when something ended. We don't know when something started, but we know when something ends. And we use until or till to mention that. For example, the workers continued the strike until management agreed to give them a pay raise. So, when this strike happened or when this strike started, we don't know. This is not sure. This is not clear for us. We only know that this finished this morning. We only know that this finished last week. We only know that this finished when management agreed to give them a pay raise. This is, for example, similar to what happened in Ireland in the peace process. They don't know when started the war, but they know when they finished the war. They finished in 1996, if my or 1999, I don't remember. When they said, "Okay, we Catholics and we Protestants sign an agreement, and we are not going to kill each other anymore." So this is the end of the disturb. This is the end of the war, the end of the troubles, right? We know the ending of something. And finally, the last conjunction is whenever. And this means every time means that every time something happens, then something else happens at the same time. So we have a condition, we have a cause effect situation. Every time or whenever we go to Armenia, we buy candies. So if we go to Armenia, we buy candies. If we don't go to Armenia, then it doesn't happen. Nothing happens, right? But if we do this activity, then we do the other activity too, right? For example, whenever we travel, if we travel, of course, whenever we travel, we take as many pictures as possible. If we don't travel, we don't take pictures. But if we travel, we take pictures, right? This is a condition. This is a cause effect situation. ¿Vale? So these are the conjunctions we take into account to mention a sequence, to relate a sequence of events, to tell a story, right? Something happens first, next something else happens, then something else, and so on. Therefore, we use after, as soon as, once, and when to mention that to focus in a posterior event, something that happens next. But the difference is that after is used when we have a gap in terms of time. Meanwhile, as soon as, once, and when is something immediate, something something happens immediately. As and while is used to mention that two activities happen in at the same time. One of them interrupts the biggest one. Before and by the time mentions or focuses in a previous activity, something that happens before. Since, we use since to focus in the starting in the starting moment, something of an activity or an event or an action. Until, we use until to focus in the moment when something ended, when an activity ended, when an action or time ended. And whenever is used when we want to mention a cause effect situation, a conditional situation. If this activity is real, then, or happens, then the other activity is real too. If this situation happens, then this other situation happens too. So this is these are the conjunctions we are going to take into account to mention our story. These are the most important conjunctions. There are more, but these, I think, are the most common and most important conjunctions of time. Okay, with this information, we now can complete our activity. Let's remember that the Learning Guide says, debido a las restricciones de la emergencia sanitaria, muchas personas estaban acostumbradas que estaban acostumbradas o para las cuales era parte de su rutina salir a lugares, para distraerse tuvieron que quedarse en casa. Tomando en cuenta eso, ¿qué solías hacer cuando estabas aburrido? haga una presentación en inglés con un video, ojo que es un video con audio y todo, describiendo de forma oral esas actividades que solía hacer en el tiempo libre, cuando no podía salir de casa para divertirse, usando las expresiones used to, complementando esa situación con el pasado simple y el presente simple para hacer un contraste. Vamos a responder también las preguntas que nos plantea: cuáles eran los momentos del día en que se sentía aburrido, si decidió por su cuenta, cuáles eran esas actividades que solía hacer para quitarse el aburrimiento, entre otras opciones. And this is the evidence we are going to present in this occasion. ¿Vale? So this is all for today. I appreciate your attendance and your evidences too, and I will meet you next time. Thank you for coming, guys, and I hope you have an excellent day. Take care and see you next time.